Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
In 2022, I purchased a house in what appeared to be an idyllic golf course community. The pristine streets, manicured lawns, and overall sense of order appealed to my desire for a well-maintained neighborhood. I thought I'd found the perfect place to settle down and start a new chapter in my life. However, my initial excitement quickly gave way to a harsh reality. What I had unknowingly stepped into was a bureaucratic quagmire that would dominate the next 3 years of my existence. Beneath the polished exterior of this seemingly perfect community lurked a complex and frustrating tangle of rules, regulations, and a homeowners association that would prove to be a constant source of aggravation. This HOA, with its intricate web of policies and procedures, was about to become the central antagonist in a story I never anticipated living through when I first signed those mortgage papers. It all started innocently enough. After moving in, I decided to take a stroll around the neighborhood to get a feel for my new surroundings. That's when I noticed something odd. Amidst the well-kept homes and perfectly trimmed hedges, there were a few properties that stood out like sore thumbs. Peeling paint, overgrown lawns, and even a couple of rusty cars parked on front yards. It didn't make sense. How could these eyesores exist in a community with an HOA? Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to dig deeper. I reached out to the property manager, expecting a simple explanation. What I got instead was the first of many surprises. "Oh, you live in the old section," she said casually. "You're not in the HOA." I was dumbfounded. "What do you mean I'm not in the HOA? I've been paying dues since I moved in." The property manager's response only added to my confusion. She explained that I was an associate member, a status that apparently came with no benefits whatsoever. No access to amenities, no discounts, nothing. Just the privilege of paying for the maintenance of common areas, and the enforcement of rules that didn't even apply to all my neighbors. This revelation set me on a path that would consume countless hours and test my patience to its limits. I started attending HOA board meetings, hoping to get some clarity on my situation. At one of these meetings, during the public questions section, I stood up and asked point blank, "Am I in the HOA or not?" The board members exchanged glances before one of them cleared his throat and began to explain. "You see, Mr. Johnson, the situation in your section is unique. When the HOA was formed in the 1980s, existing homeowners were given the choice to opt in or out. Some did, some didn't. That's why you might be in the HOA while your immediate neighbors aren't." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you're telling me that I'm bound by rules that my next-door neighbor can ignore completely?" The board member nodded, looking uncomfortable. "That's correct. It's an unusual arrangement, but it's how things were set up." I left that meeting with more questions than answers and a growing sense of frustration. It was time to do some serious research. Over the next few weeks, I spent every spare moment digging into the history of my property and the HOA. I requested copies of the opt-in agreement for my house, but after months of waiting and following up, I still had nothing to show for it. Undeterred, I took matters into my own hands and headed to the county recorder's office. Hours of sifting through dusty records finally paid off. I discovered something that would change everything. There were no deed restrictions recorded for my property. Not a single document linking my house to the HOA. Armed with this information, I went back to the HOA board. "I want you to prove that my property is part of the HOA," I demanded. Their response? Silence. They chose to ignore me, probably hoping I'd give up and go away. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I decided to escalate the situation. I hired an attorney specializing in real estate law and presented my findings to the board and their legal counsel. Their initial response was a letter so full of legal jargon it might as well have been written in ancient Greek. But the essence was clear. They were trying to intimidate me into backing down. My attorney fired back, demanding that they officially state that my property was not part of the HOA and agree to hold me harmless for any future dues or assessments. It took some back and forth, but finally, their attorney caved. We received a letter stating exactly what we'd asked for. I thought that would be the end of it, but my assumption proved to be premature. The situation continued to unfold in unexpected ways, revealing that there was still much more to come. Months passed, and despite having a copy of their own attorney's letter, the management company started sending me notices about unpaid annual dues. Each time I responded by reminding them of the letter, but they persisted. Eventually, They threatened to send my bill to collections. You really don't want to do that, I warned them during one particularly heated phone call. My attorney is ready and willing to take this further if necessary. The woman on the other end of the line sighed. Mr. Johnson, I understand your frustration, but I'm just following our standard procedures. If you have an issue with this, you'll need to take it up with the board. Oh, believe me, I intend to, I replied, my voice tight with anger. As I hung up the phone, I realized this battle was far from over. The HOA and management company seemed determined to ignore the reality of the situation, continuing to treat me as a member despite clear evidence to the contrary. The two could play at that game. I decided to go on the offensive. My next step was to recover the money I'd paid to the HOA over the years, about $4,000 in annual dues and an assessment for some litigation they'd been involved in. I marked the date of the next HOA meeting on my calendar and spent the weeks leading up to it gathering every piece of documentation I could find. On the night of the meeting, I arrived early, a thick folder tucked under my arm. As other homeowners filtered in, I could feel the tension in the room. The board members eyed me warily as I took my seat in the front row. When the public forum portion of the meeting began, I stood up, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. Good evening, I began, my voice steady. I'm here to address an ongoing issue regarding my property's status in this HOA. I laid out my case, methodically presenting each piece of evidence. The lack of deed restrictions, the letter from their own attorney, the continued harassment for dues I didn't owe. As I spoke, I could see the other homeowners in attendance leaning forward, their interest piqued. In light of all this, I concluded, I'm formally requesting a refund of all dues and assessments I've paid since purchasing my property. I'm giving the board 60 days to process this refund. After that, my attorney will be filing an action to recover these funds. The room erupted into murmurs as I sat down. The board members looked shell-shocked, clearly unprepared for this level of confrontation. The president of the board, a man named Tom who I'd had several run-ins with before, tried to regain control of the meeting. Mr. Johnson, he said, his voice strained, we appreciate you bringing this to our attention. We'll need to review this information with our legal counsel before we can respond. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Of course. I look forward to your response within the time frame I've outlined. As the meeting continued, I could feel the eyes of the other homeowners on me. Some looked impressed, others worried. I knew I'd just made myself the talk of the neighborhood, but I didn't care. This was about principle, about standing up against an organization that thought it could bully and intimidate its way to getting what it wanted. In the days that followed, I received a mix of reactions from my neighbors. Some congratulated me on my stand against the HOA, sharing their own frustrations with the organization. Others warned me that I was making powerful enemies, that the board would make my life difficult. One afternoon, as I was mowing my lawn, my next-door neighbor Bill came over. He was one of the non-HOA members, and his property reflected the patchwork nature of our neighborhood. His lawn was adorned with an eclectic collection of garden gnomes, a sight that would have likely been frowned upon by the HOA's strict standards. Heard about your showdown with the board, he said, leaning on the fence. Gotta say I'm impressed. Not many people have the guts to take them on like that. I switched off the mower and wiped the sweat from my brow. Someone had to do it, Bill. They can't just keep operating like this, ignoring their own rules when it suits them. Bill nodded sagely. True enough, but watch your back. Tom and his cronies on the board, they don't like being challenged. They might try to make things difficult for you. His words proved prophetic. Over the next few weeks, I noticed an increase in drive-bys from the HOA's compliance officer. He'd cruise past my house slowly, clearly looking for any violation he could pin on me. But I was meticulous about following the rules. My lawn was perfectly manicured, my house well maintained. They weren't going to get me on a technicality. The 60-day deadline I'd given the board came and went with no response. True to my word, I instructed my attorney to file an action to recover my funds. The day after the filing, I received a call from Tom, the board president. Mr. Johnson, he began, his tone a mixture of frustration and forced politeness. I hope you realize that this action you're taking is going to cost the HOA, your neighbors, a significant amount in legal fees. I couldn't help but laugh. That's rich, Tom. You're trying to guilt me after ignoring your own attorney's advice. Maybe you should have thought about that before continuing to harass me for dues I don't owe. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Tom spoke again, his voice was cold. You're making a big mistake, Johnson. This community has a long memory. Is that a threat, Tom? I asked, my own voice hardening. Because I'd be careful about making threats. I'm sure our lawyers would be very interested in hearing about that." He hung up without another word. As the legal proceedings dragged on, I found myself becoming something of a local celebrity, or perhaps notorious figure would be more accurate. Other homeowners would stop me in the street or at the local grocery store asking for updates on my battle with the HOA. Some shared their own stories of run-ins with the board, painting a picture of an organization drunk on its own power. One evening, as I was walking my dog, I ran into Brenda, a longtime resident who had served on the board years ago. She pulled me aside, her voice low. "You know what you're doing, it's long overdue. The board has been operating unchecked for years, but be careful. They have ways of making life difficult for people who cross them." Her warning sent a chill down my spine, but it also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up for all the homeowners who had been bullied and intimidated over the years. As the months passed, the legal battle continued to unfold. Depositions were taken, documents subpoenaed. The HOA's lawyers tried every trick in the book to delay and obfuscate, but my attorney was relentless. We were building a strong case, not just for the recovery of my dues, but for the HOA's pattern of overreach and mismanagement. Through it all, I remained steadfast. Every letter, every threat, every attempt at intimidation only fueled my determination. I knew I was in for a long fight, but I was prepared to see it through to the end. The HOA had picked the wrong homeowner to mess with, and I was going to make sure they never forgot it. As I sit here today, typing out this story, the battle is far from over. The legal proceedings continue, with no clear end in sight. But I'm not backing down. I've become the member from hell, the thorn in the HOA's side that they can't seem to shake. And you know what? I'm proud of it. To all those out there dealing with overbearing HOAs, remember this: you have rights, you have a voice, and sometimes if you're willing to fight, you can win. It may not be easy, and it certainly won't be quick, but standing up for what's right is always worth it. So here I am, 3 years into this saga, still fighting the good fight. The HOA might have thought they could push me around, but they've learned the hard way that some people push back. And I'll keep pushing until justice is served, not just for me, but for every homeowner who's ever felt powerless in the face of HOA tyranny. This story isn't over yet, but when it is, I hope it serves as a reminder that sometimes, just sometimes, David can indeed take on Goliath, and win. This is the statute in Maryland Code Com Section 12-102. Except as otherwise provided by law, a person may not charge interest in excess of an effective rate of simple interest of 6% per annum on the unpaid principal balance of a loan. Each state will differ on this. So just look it up and make it legal, and cite the statute if it will help. You cannot just make something absurdly high up and expect it to be paid, is really all I'm getting at. Please don't respond with, that says loan blah blah blah. No, you aren't the first to think of it. Your state will have a law that limits it. Use that. Source: my wife is a lawyer. We've done it. As long as you put it in writing, it is enforceable, depending on the laws of your state. You might want to suggest to your attorney that they have HOA lawyer's letter stating that your property is not in the HOA recorded by the county clerk. This will make it obvious to anyone viewing your deed that you are not a part of the HOA. Not your lawyer and not giving legal advice, just trying to plant a few seeds of thought. If the bill gets to a collection agency, check out the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act and its remedies. Get alerts on your credit. If the bill or the collections pop up there, check out the Fair Credit Reporting Act and its remedies. There are usually lawyers in most large U.S. cities that will take your case. They are filed in federal court just for fun and giggles.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.